One of the most common questions that I get relating to migrating to Microsoft 365 is how much bandwidth do I need for Microsoft 365? I currently have enough bandwidth for my users to get to the internet, but what if I move all of my Teams and Exchange and other on-premise services and move them over to the cloud? I now need to connect a lot more to the cloud. The reality is that a lot of that communication between your on-premises organization and Microsoft 365 is really optimized and compressed in a way that bandwidth for most organizations is not really an issue unless you start to use some workloads that are much more bandwidth intensive, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But when you start your planning to Microsoft 365 and you're about ready to deploy, you're going to evaluate the amount of bandwidth you're going to need, but you're also going to have to evaluate a lot of other components that relate to networking. Now, this course doesn't really focus on networking, but I do want to point you to the Network Planning and Performance Tuning Guide from Microsoft 365. This tool always gets updated with new best practices as well as guidance such as ports, TCP ports that you must allow for connectivity. If you also have an Azure deployment, you'll have to ensure that you have best connectivity to Azure and you're evaluating that bandwidth as well as all the connectivity requirements, your ports, your gateways, and your firewalls. However, if you truly are concerned that you might not have enough outbound and inbound bandwidth from your offices, you'll want to evaluate the bandwidth requirements for the biggest workload, which is really Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams gives you the ability to have audio calls, video calls, and HD video calls as well that require a greater bandwidth. And so that would certainly be a matter of consideration if you plan to allow the Microsoft Teams workload and allow your users to establish face-to-face calls as well. Now, if you are concerned about your site specifically and where you are located geographically in the world, you'll also be able to perform a network connectivity test. So from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center under Network Connectivity, which is right below Health, you have an option for running a network connectivity test. If I click on Network Connectivity Test, it will detect my location and I click on Run Test. And what it does is it actually looks at my location and all of the Microsoft 365 connection points that are close to my location. And in this case, I have some egress and ingress points relating to Exchange, relating to Teams and SharePoint, and it knows where I am based on my IP address. And here I'm located in California and it's looking at the connection points and letting me know if I'm close enough and what bandwidth do I have from my office to that location. If I click on Details, I see a little bit more information about my location and the egress locations, the points, the services that I'm going to be connecting to and whether or not I have a strong connection to those. So for example, here there is one that is located in San Jose, California, which is physically hundreds of miles away from where I am, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers as well, very far away from where I am. And I have a very strong connection here with only 11 millisecond connectivity. So I have here other options as well for Exchange Online. All other services are connected through these various egress points as well. If you go back to the admin portal, I see here that I also have the same information for my entire organization. So I can create what's called the location, which I've done here. And this little green point represents the location of where my office is. So that is my work location. And then I see my connectivity points, which is sort of a score that's given to me in terms of the overall connectivity for my area based on all the various services that I use. So I see all of the different services and I see that one of them, which is SharePoint. My location is a little bit far from the closest SharePoint egress point, so I might have a little bit of a slower performance when it comes to SharePoint, but you see that my overall network assessment score is 86%, which means that my users can expect a very good connectivity to their Microsoft 365 services.